Welcome to Magic Beyond the Books and happy Halloween season. I'm Renee, and today I'm going to be talking about werewolves and vampires in Harry Potter. Warning, there are Harry Potter spoilers in this episode. Let's get into it. So let's first start with werewolves. Before we get into Harry Potter, I just want to go into the history of werewolf lore. So, what I could find on the internet is one theory suggests that the concept of werewolves came from warrior cults who would wear wolf skins to channel the animal's power in battle. But there's also in Greek mythology the legend of King Lycan, who was turned into a wolf by Zeus for serving him human flesh. Or there's also the Greek myth about the Nuri, a tribe who transformed into wolves several days each year. And a Roman writer, Petronius, documented tales of people turning into wolves with magic, and they were called Verispellis or turnskin. And then in Norse and Germanic folklore, there's the Volsunga saga, which features creatures who, again, like put on wolf skins and then they become wolf warriors. So there's a lot of different, I guess, theories about where it actually started and like in different cultures. I imagine, I guess it mostly comes from like the very real instance of people like using wolf skins and like the belief about like becoming or using like the power of wolves in battle. So it's interesting how like these myths and lores come about and then get passed down. But in specifically werewolves in Harry Potter, they come up in the books. They're more in the books than in the movies, but obviously the movies has them as well. The two main characters from Harry Potter that are werewolves that are prominently featured as part of the story are Remus Lupin and of course Fenrir Greyback. In the Harry Potter universe, werewolves or lycanthrope are humans who turn into a wolf upon the complete rising of the full moon. And it only happens to those infected by being bitten by a werewolf while the werewolf is in wolf form, so during a full moon. And bites and scratches from werewolves leave permanent scars, which is why Lupin has scars even from himself. And a mix of powdered silver and dittany applied to that fresh bite will seal the wound and prevent the victim from bleeding to death. Because some people in the Harry Potter books, they talk about some people dying from werewolf bites. So it just because a werewolf bites you doesn't mean you're like automatically going to live and be a werewolf. You still need to survive in order to be able to live on and then have your own transformations. So there's a little bit of differences here because I know like I've seen other shows and movies that have werewolves, and I'm sure many of you listening have done the same. And sometimes like, the people that turn into werewolves can turn on demand. Like it doesn't have to be when it's a full moon, or it could be that like a family gene gets passed down. I see that commonly. Like I think Twilight has that case. Same with like the Vampire Diaries, the werewolves in that. They get like a family gene. So it's not like anyone can just be a werewolf. It's this gene that's passed down through generations within the family. Whereas in Harry Potter, it could be anyone. It's just with the fact that you got bitten. So you don't have to, it's seemingly you don't have to have a certain gene to be a werewolf, though we can get into it later, but the passing down of the werewolf gene is questionable. Another thing in other media is silver bullets or silver in general being fatal to werewolves, but in the Harry Potter universe, silver bullets do not kill werewolves, though when the books were coming out and then Wormtail in the fourth book gets a silver hand, a lot of fans suspected that Wormtail's silver hand was going to be what killed Remus with the whole like silver and him being a werewolf. But obviously that didn't come to fruition, and that was never in like J.K. Rowling's plans. And as I mentioned before, let's get into the werewolf gene with passed down to children. So in Harry Potter, in that universe, It's unknown if the gene can be passed down to children. So, like I said, it's not like it's in particular families, but it's also unclear if you can pass it down to your children. So, like Lupin, for example, was really concerned that his son Teddy was going to end up like him and be a werewolf. And apparently, werewolves in the Harry Potter world don't frequently procreate. So it's Teddy ends up not being a werewolf, but that doesn't necessarily mean that a werewolf couldn't procreate and then pass that gene on. So it's a little bit unclear if it can be passed that way. It seems like in the Harry Potter world, the like the infection, if you will, of being a werewolf gets passed through blood and through bites. So maybe you could pass it down to children, but for example, Fenrir Greyback is positioning himself to bite children. So, and Fenrir Greyback's the one that turned Lupin. So he's creating his own like army or his own offspring, if you will, in a way by using bites, not necessarily by like having children. And then another interesting part about the books that actually is not in the movies is the werewolves in Harry Potter are supposed to be almost indistinguishable from a normal wolf. There's supposed to be several small differences, including the fact that their snout is shorter, they have more human-like eyes, a tufted tail, and then their personality is different from regular wolves. And they specifically in the lesson where Snape teaches them about werewolves, they bring up the fact of like, okay, like what are the several things that you can use to know the difference between the two. Whereas if you watch like Prisoner of Azkaban and you see Remus Lupin's transformation, he does not look like a wolf at all. Like he definitely looks like a man wolf. Like he's standing on two legs. He has really long arms and legs, longer than a human, longer than a wolf. And he's like almost hairless, and whereas normal wolf would be much more furry, and just like his ears are different. There's just so many things that are different of his look than the look described by the books. But they seem like the personality is the same. So in Harry Potter, once they turn into a werewolf, they are very sadistic. They want to go after humans and hurt humans. Like they're out of their mind and they just need to go like scratch and bite humans. And so they can be really, really aggressive, which is different than like a wolf. A regular wolf isn't going to be like actively seeking out humans to hurt. And um like I said, so when when they make their transition, they become a werewolf. They're not keeping their human mind, so that's why it's very like they could kill their loved ones without remorse in this moment of being a wolf. Like werewolves are gonna be hurting everyone and anyone they can that's a human. They're indiscriminately, and they're not feeling and thinking the way that they don't have their same like moral compass that they would as a human. But once they complete their transformation, they transform back into a human, they're able to remember everything that happened. That's how Lupin, when he gets set loose on the ground, he remembers everything that happened. He remembers that he almost bit them and feels that remorse and wants to resign and everything. So I guess I shouldn't say they can feel remorse after when they remember, but in the moment they're not like thinking like a human does. And the interesting thing though is that werewolves can accompany other animals. It's just the humans that they want to hurt. So that is why when the marauders become animagi, they are able to accompany Lupin during his transitions and like into a werewolf. He's not a threat to them when they're animals. So he's not like werewolves in general are not threats to other animals. It's really just humans. And when you could say like, oh, you could just like lock them up. But Lupin explains that the problem with that, when you're left away, you're just like locked up and there's no humans and there's no distraction of like being around other animals, you're just scratching and biting yourself. That's not exactly the best solution, it seems. And yeah, I think that covers the main aspects of the werewolves in the Harry Potter universe. There is no cure to werewolfism or lycanthropy in Harry Potter, but there's the wolfsbane potion, which must have gotten invented sometime during like Lupin's adulthood because it didn't exist when he was a child, but it exists by the time and by 1993 when we're in book 3. Damocles Belby invents this wolfsbane potion, and the potion doesn't cure vampirism or not vampirism, werewolfism, like people that have been bitten by a werewolf. It doesn't stop them from having to transform every full moon or anything like that, but they are able to keep their human mind during the transformation. So that's what Lupin is doing when he comes to Hogwarts to be a professor. He's just taking that potion, which is brewed by Snape every month, and he's just basically curling up under his desk as a werewolf, and like he's able to have control over himself during the transformation. But you might ask, okay, well, why doesn't every werewolf just take the wolfsbane potion and then werewolf people that are werewolves, it won't be really a problem? But the potion is really difficult to make, and the ingredients are also extremely expensive. And I'm going to talk a little bit about their werewolves' place in society. Essentially, most werewolves don't have a lot of access to funds. So it's really hard for them to be able to afford to take this potion. So, with that, let's talk about their place in society in the Harry Potter world. So, we get a little bit of a like weird view of werewolves because we're seeing this through Harry Potter's perspective and through, experiences with Dumbledore, experiences with the Order of the Phoenix. So Lupin is being treated more like, just another person and a friend and a loved one and everything. But werewolves, that's kind of not how he's treated by the rest of the world. So in the wizarding world, werewolves are shunned by society. It's hard for them to get work. There's legislation that people like Umbridge create against them that make it even harder for them to get jobs. There's just this stigma around like wizards don't want to be around werewolves, and there's like a lot of negative connotations about them. And that comes from like Voldemort's side and the Death Eaters, but it comes from other people too. It's not just like, oh, the dark side doesn't like werewolves or treats them badly. It's everyone. It would be your everyday person. Like Ron's initial reaction to finding out that Remus is a werewolf is like, don't touch me, like doesn't want to be near him because of all the stigmas and all the like stories that he was told growing up or that was just like out in the world. So because of that, many werewolves kind of create in their own society. They live in their little colonies and work against wizards actually. So Fenrir Greyback is a big proponent of the werewolves creating their own society, and he's trying to build up the werewolf population to then like overthrow the wizarding world. So he's got his own little mission that he's on where he's off trying to bite young children and then raise them in his colony to believe that wizards are bad and try to create like overthrow the wizarding world and create a world where werewolves rule the world. And somehow Fenrir Greyback believes that working with Voldemort, he thinks that under Voldemort's rule, werewolves will have a better existence. I don't think that's ever going to be the case, even if Voldemort did take over. But that seems to be Fenrir's belief. On Voldemort's side, like Voldemort and the Death Eaters use the werewolves as a threat. And they're kind of on their side, but they're not allowed to be Death Eaters. They can't wear Death Eater robes. They're not given tattoos. So they're kind of like half support. Voldemort also looks down on werewolves, just like he looks down on pretty much everyone. Things like house elves, werewolves, anyone with like muggle-borns, he looks down on them like they're beneath him. So it seems he kind of like feels the same way about werewolves. Like they're not good enough to be Death Eaters, but they're good enough to do his bidding kind of thing. And J.K. Rowling's depiction of Lupin was a metaphor for people with HIV who like there's a lot of the same when you read it again, like you can see a lot of the similarities, like people experiencing prejudice, concerns of passing on the condition to children, having to take a quote unquote like potion or medicine. So it's interesting if you like kind of thinking about that metaphor and then going back and reading and like how Lupin's treated by other people, like he's like infected, diseased, is kind of an interesting like parallel between that, like the metaphor of HIV. So that's a little bit about the werewolves in the books. Like I mentioned before, we get a little bit of a depiction in the movies, though it's a little bit different than the books, and we don't get as much of the kind of backstory with like Fenrir Greyback going around killing and biting children. And he's not just biting children to like join his calling. He gets used by Voldemort. I guess I should specify, to bite children as a threat. Like, oh, if their parents won't join the Death Eaters, then he uses Greyback and says like, well, he'll bite your children and they'll die or become werewolves, which is a big threat, obviously, for parents. So that's specifically how he's been used, like as coercion. Even Draco Malfoy mentions Fenrir Greyback when he goes to Borgin and Burks as a threat. Like no one wants to become a werewolf and have to be forced to be a wolf and ostracized by society. So that's a enticing threat to follow along with what the Death Eaters are doing. In the movies, the two main werewolves we see are Remus Lupin, who's played by David Thewlis, and Fenrir Greyback, who's played by Dave Legeno. Remus Lupin, one person, Robin Williams, was really interested in playing a few of the different Harry Potter characters, including Lupin, but they had a rule of only British and Irish casting, so obviously he wasn't able to play it. And we get David, who actually David Thewlis originally auditioned for the part of Professor Quirrell, but Ian Hart got that part. And then he got so that was movie 1. So he was able to come on for movie 3. And then, he continues to appear throughout the remainder of the movies. Though he has a little bit less of a part and they get less into like the relationship of him and Tonks and everything, he still is able to like make appearances and, he's a part of the Battle of Hogwarts, everything. Alfonso Cuarón is the director that did the third movie, which is Remus Lupin's first appearance, and that's when he's the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher and everything. So Alfonso Cuarón told David to portray Remus as a gay junkie. So interesting direction there. And a little bit about Remus from the books is his Patronus actually does take the form of a wolf, not a werewolf, but a wolf. And then when Tonks falls in love with him, her Patronus changes to a werewolf. And if you don't know too much about David Thewlis, he's in a variety of other things. I feel like I keep seeing him pop up in some newer movies too. He's also known for Wonder Woman, Naked, and The Theory of Everything. I saw him in the second Enola Holmes movie. It's interesting because he plays a good guy, obviously, in Harry Potter, but I see him play a lot of darker roles. So he kind of plays both sides there. And then the other werewolf from the movies is Dave Legeno. He played Fenrir Greyback. And Fenrir is also known for, or sorry, not Fenrir. Dave is also known for Snow White and the Huntsman, Snatch, and Centurion. And he is a mixed martial artist, or he was. He's passed away now. And Fenrir Greyback, I think this might be confusing for people that watch just the movies, and he's all like, he looks like a werewolf or part werewolf all the time, even not when it's a full moon. He's kind of rejected regular human society and has taught himself to have a taste for human blood all the time. So he's kind of living as if he's a werewolf outside of the times of the full moon. And so that's why he's like attacking people. That's why he attacks Bill Weasley and bites him when he's in human form. And I don't know, like the depiction of him being really hairy and looking wolf-like his eyes are kind of different and he's got like sharp teeth. I think that's a little bit odd. Like I don't imagine that he was that like he was able to make himself partially transformed physically when he was not actually transformed into a werewolf, but I don't know, maybe take whatever interpretation you want to. And then lastly, on the werewolf front, I thought it'd be interesting to look into the actors from Harry Potter who played werewolves in other film, TV, things like that. So there's so many actors and extras and side characters in all the 8 movies. So I might be missing people, but the one person I could find was actually Albus Dumbledore, the second Albus Dumbledore, Michael Gambon. He plays a werewolf in a movie called The Beast Must Die. It's a 1974 horror slash mystery film. And when I was looking into this film, it looked very interesting. So the story is that this hunter invites multiple guests to his house and then announces to the surprise of his wife and all the guests that one of them is a werewolf and he is determined to hunt them down, and they're all going to be stuck there for, like, I guess the weekend. And the movie is spent trying to figure out who the werewolf is. And then the movie has this break actually in the movie where they stop and they give you a moment to like put out your guess for who the werewolf is. And then it's revealed that it is Michael Gambon's character. So I just thought that was really interesting. So maybe go watch that movie. I mean, spoiler alert, but like it came out in the 70s, so it's been a while. But maybe check that out if you're interested to see Albus Dumbledore play a werewolf. And that's all I have for werewolves. So let's get into vampires. So the history of vampire lore, it began in Eastern European folklore, and it started out as this non-corporeal ghost monster that was blamed for disease. So it wasn't necessarily like someone who had a human form that sucked blood. It was just this ethereal sort of like magical existence that was spreading disease and killing people. So like more of an abstract idea of like what we know as vampires today. In 1047, it was written in an old Russian text, the word upir, U-P-I-R, and that was an evil supernatural entity. But then also ancient Greeks and Egyptians had myths of demons and spirits that fed on humans. So there's a lot of these like different myths that must have fed into what kind of came to the modern idea of what a vampire is. And then the earliest recorded like vampires were people, this is kind of gross, but people would die of tuberculosis and they'd be found with blood around their mouth and a bloated body. And it was determined that they were a vampire because they had been feeding on humans, and that's why they were full and dead and had blood on them. So I guess that's where like kind of the reality fed into the myth. And then now, I mean, vampires, I feel like have blown up. There was the phase of the like Dracula, dark vampires, and then it became the attractive vampires and all the Twilight and Vampire Diaries. And I feel like when I was growing up, vampires were this like sexy, attractive, supposed to be like the love interest of these sci-fi type romances versus the scary demon monster. And then, they've come into like more comedic things. Like I think of What We Do in the Shadows, that show. So vampires, I mean, there's just so much vampire content out there. But let's talk about vampires in Harry Potter. In Harry Potter, vampires exist. They're mentioned multiple times, though they're not part of a key like plot of the story. They do exist in the Harry Potter world, and they're studied by the students as dark creatures in Defense Against the Dark Arts. Like they would study, werewolves as dark creatures or Grindylows or anything like that. And there's not much known about vampires in Harry Potter. J.K. Rowling didn't really get into it, and she did that for a reason. She wrote that she felt that the vampire myth was so rich and had been exploited so many times, and she just didn't feel that there was much that she could add to all the content that was already out there about vampires. And she also felt that they were more attributed to Eastern Europe than Britain, and whereas the Harry Potter books focus more so on some of like the British and Irish folklore. So she kind of like let that be. She, in her original notes, she had a vampire teacher that she named Trocar, Trocar. And that teacher was never assigned a subject. It was just going to be a teacher at Hogwarts. And she didn't really have much on him other than his name. So some people think that that was like, that turned into Snape, but that's not really true. Like he was just his own. There was just maybe going to be a vampire teacher. Like there's a ghost teacher, but it just didn't end up coming to fruition in the actual book. It was never written. It was just an early note. And trocar is a sharply pointed shaft inserted into arteries or cavities to extract bodily fluids. So that's what the name comes from, to be a little symbolism for the fact that he was going to be a vampire. The only vampire that we actually see and meet sort of in the Harry Potter universe is Sanguini. Sanguini attended the Slug Club Christmas party in book 6. That's Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. And Sanguini was a guest of Eldred Warple, which is a biographer, author. And he's described as being an emaciated man with dark circles under his eyes. And he looks bored and he just kind of hang out at the party until a group of girls attracts his attention. And he seems to kind of look at the girls and be interested in them. And then Eldred distracts him with a pasty and tries to keep him from biting anyone. And the name Sanguini comes from the Latin word sanguinis, which is often associated with different, like blood, bloody, blood colored, bloodthirsty. Something with blood is related to that, like the origin of that word. So that's where the name Sanguini comes from. And Sanguini does appear in the movies. He's played by Charlie Bennison, and who is also known for Simon and Emily and Metrosexual. And there were scenes actually shot with him, with the whole, like, so in the Harry Potter books, Eldred Warple goes to Harry and tries to get Harry to let him do a biography on him. And then Harry pretty much shuts him down pretty quickly and tries to get out of that conversation and leaves. It's a quick little snippet in the books. I guess they filmed that or some of that in the movies, but that ended up being cut from the film. But you can still see Sanguini. He's wearing this like black pinstripe suit. You can see him in the background of some of the shots at the Slug Club party if you kind of look close. So the actors in Harry Potter, a good number of them played vampires in other films, and I may even be missing people, but I'll list off everyone that I could find. So first of all, Gary Oldman, who played Sirius Black in most of the Harry Potter movies from the third on, it was Dracula in Bram Stoker's Dracula, so definitely a vampire. Another one, probably the most famous, is Robert Pattinson, who played Cedric Diggory. He was Edward Cullen in Twilight. And Jamie Campbell Bower, who played Gellert Grindelwald, he was also in Twilight. He was Caius in the Volturi. So 2 Twilight people crossovers. And then Bill Nighy, who was Rufus Scrimgeour, the Minister of Magic, second one after Fudge. He played Victor, a vampire, in the 3 Underworld movies. Then there's Scarlett Byrne. She played Pansy Parkinson in some of the films. She's not a huge role, but she's kind of like, going after Harry a little bit. She was in The Vampire Diaries, and she played a vampire, Nora Hildegard, which was one of the heretics from, I think that was season 7 or 8 they came in. So she had a vampire role, kind of weird vampire in that. And then, I don't know if we're counting Fantastic Beasts, but Jude Law was the young Dumbledore in Fantastic Beasts movies. And he played a vampire in the movie that, it's weird, like released under 2 different titles. One is The Wisdom of Crocodiles, and it was also called Immortality, about a vampire that was like I guess, preying on young women, and then he decides to go after one woman that he's having trouble like seducing into feeding off of her. But anyway, that was a vampire role that Jude Law played. So a lot of vampire crossovers from the Harry Potter actors. Now let's get into theories about both vampires and werewolves in the Harry Potter books. So the first one, this was a big one with fans, is that Severus Snape is a vampire. This is based on the fact that he's often described as looking pale and sickly, having that like waxy skin, and he wears a lot of black, and there's some notes that he looks kind of like bat-like. And that was a persistent rumor from fans, but J.K. Rowling acknowledged this, saying that he is not a vampire because of many reasons, like no bodies with puncture marks were ever found around him. He's seen many, many times in the daylight, and he never turns into a bat or any of the things about vampire lore. And as I mentioned before, the teacher Trokar that J.K. Rowling had in some of her initial notes that was a vampire, that wasn't like a predecessor to Snape. That like, it's not like that teacher then turned into Snape. She just had that idea originally and then didn't end up going anywhere with it. So it's not like Severus Snape was like originally planned to be a vampire or anything like that. Next theory is that lycanthropy is an alchemical accident that happened when a magical experiment with lunar magic went wrong. From that one accident, the theory is that werewolfism was created, and then from there it's been passed down through bites. So I mean, that could be the case. It's not really addressed how werewolves come about in Harry Potter. My thoughts on this theory about werewolves originally coming from some sort of accident with a magical experiment, I don't know. I guess there has to have been an original werewolf, and how did they come about? I'm not sure. So maybe. I don't know. And then the last big theory that people had was that Draco Malfoy is a werewolf and was bitten by Fenrir Greyback. And the support for this theory was that in book 6, he's described as having this sickly looking appearance, and obviously like he was crying in the bathroom and having a lot of issues in book 6. And he also, in the beginning of book 6, threatens Borgin at Borgin and Burke's with Fenrir Greyback. So we know that, and obviously Fenrir was having dealings with the Death Eaters, and he appears at Malfoy Manor at the end of book 7. So he's definitely around and could have theoretically bitten Draco. But J.K. Rowling said that that's not true. So that's been discredited. And obviously, like, it gets explained why he looks so sickly is because he's under the stress of trying to kill Dumbledore that whole year, and, you know, knowing that he would get killed if he didn't complete his mission. So I never thought that he would, that like idea that he would be a werewolf never even occurred to me. And I don't think like, I mean, there would be some serious consequences for Fenrir from Bellatrix and Narcissa, and Lucius like would have killed Fenrir, I think, if they had like gone after Draco. There's so many people who would fight for him and would not be okay with that. So I think that's a bit of a stretch on that theory, in my opinion. But that's all the theories I could find. Send me your thoughts on vampires and werewolves in Harry Potter. What did you think? Did you like them? Did you wish there was more? There definitely wasn't a lot of vampirism in Harry Potter, though we know it exists. But that's all for this episode. So thanks for joining on this magical journey through the wizarding world of Harry Potter. And don't forget to rate and subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening. Until next week, happy reading, happy listening, and may you never be bitten by a werewolf or vampire.